The shadow animatronics in Five Nights at Freddy's occupy one of the most mysterious and debated corners of the series. Lore, acting less like physical characters and more like manifestations of deeper forces tied to memory, suffering, and possibly the metaphysical consequences of the tragedies surrounding the various locations. Among them, Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie stand out as eerie, almost ghost-like entities whose appearances feel inconsistent in a way that suggests they are not bound by the same rules as the other animatronics. Their presence is fleeting, often appearing in secret minigames or rare gameplay moments, and this rarity reinforces the idea that they are not simply haunted machines, but something more abstract, perhaps echoes of past events or embodiments of agony itself. Shadow Freddy is typically associated with stillness and passive observation. In several appearances, he sits slumped or motionless, almost like a hollow shell. This has led to interpretations that he represents a byproduct of past violence, possibly connected to the events of the early restaurant era where multiple children were murdered. Unlike the main animatronics, who are driven by possession and a desire for revenge or confusion, Shadow Freddy does not actively pursue the player in a traditional sense. Instead, he seems to guide or lure, especially in sequences where following him leads to hidden or secret outcomes. This behavior has fueled theories that he acts as a kind of guide through memory, possibly leading the player or the spirits toward forgotten truths. Shadow Bonnie, on the other hand, is far more erratic and aggressive in presentation. His appearances are often sudden and disorienting, sometimes causing the game to glitch or crash. This instability has been interpreted as a sign that Shadow Bonnie is less a character and more a manifestation of corrupted data or fractured reality within the narrative itself. In universe, this could symbolize a spirit or force that is unable to fully materialize, existing between states of being. Some interpretations connect Shadow Bonnie to the concept of remnant, or emotional energy, left behind after death, suggesting that he is a visual representation of that energy breaking through into the physical world. To understand these entities fully, it is necessary to look at the broader story of the locations in Five Nights at Freddy's. The earliest restaurants, often associated with the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, are places where the initial tragedies occur. Children go missing. These events create a lingering presence that infects the animatronics, giving rise to the haunted behavior seen throughout the series. As the timeline progresses, new locations are opened in attempts to move past these incidents, but each new establishment seems to carry forward the same underlying darkness. The second major location, a reimagined and more modern version of the restaurant, introduces facial recognition systems and advanced animatronics, yet it still becomes the site of further incidents, including the infamous bite that leads to severe injury. It is in this environment that Shadow Bonnie makes one of his most striking appearances, reinforcing the idea that these shadow entities are not tied to a single place, but instead follow the thread of tragedy from one location to another. They seem to emerge wherever the emotional weight of past events becomes too great to remain hidden. Later locations, including smaller establishments and underground facilities, expand the lore by introducing the idea that the animatronics are being actively experimented on. Concepts like remnant and soul binding become more explicit, suggesting that the haunting is not merely accidental, but has been studied and possibly manipulated. In this context, the shadow animatronics begin to feel less like random anomalies and more like unintended consequences of tampering with forces that were never fully understood. They may represent what happens when emotional energy or spiritual residue is pushed beyond its limits, losing coherence and taking on unstable forms. There is also a strong thematic link between the shadow animatronics and memory. Many sequences in the series involve fragmented minigames that depict past events in a simplified, almost symbolic style. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie often appear in or around these sequences, as if they are tied to the act of remembering itself. They may not be individual spirits in the same way as the possessed animatronics, but rather composites of multiple experiences, a kind of collective echo of everything that has happened in these locations. Another important aspect of their role is how they blur the line between reality and illusion. The series frequently plays with the idea that what the player sees may not be entirely real, and the shadow animatronics are a key part of this uncertainty. Their appearances often coincide with moments where the game behaves strangely, suggesting that they exist outside the normal rules of the environment. This could imply that they are aware of the structure of the world in a way that other characters are not, or that they are manifestations of something that transcends the physical setting altogether. The role of the shadow animatronics becomes especially important during the hidden minigames in Five Nights at Freddy's 3, where the story shifts away from straightforward survival horror and into symbolic, fragmented memory sequences that reveal what truly happened to the spirits tied to the animatronics. These minigames are not presented as literal events happening in real time, but rather as reconstructed memories or spiritual spaces where the past can be revisited, and in some cases corrected. Within these sequences, Shadow Freddy takes on a much more active and meaningful role, while Shadow Bonnie appears in a more subtle but equally important way connected to the hidden good ending. In the minigames where the player controls the classic animatronics, Shadow Freddy appears as a dark, motionless figure positioned in a room apart from the main path. When the player reaches him, he silently invites the animatronic to follow. This moment is crucial because it breaks the normal rules of the minigame. Instead of continuing through a structured environment, the player is led off-screen into a glitched, shadowy space. What follows is not a normal continuation, but a transition into a sequence where the animatronic is dismantled by the purple-clad figure. This pattern repeats across multiple minigames, strongly implying that Shadow Freddy is guiding the animatronics toward their destruction. This has led to one of the most widely discussed interpretations of his role, that Shadow Freddy is acting as a lure or facilitator for the events that allow the murderer to dismantle the haunted suits. However, the intention behind this is not entirely clear. One interpretation is that he represents the influence of the murderer himself, possibly a projection of his will or the lingering effect of his actions. Another interpretation is that Shadow Freddy is something more neutral or inevitable, guiding the spirits toward a necessary step in their eventual release. By leading them to be dismantled, he may be setting in motion the chain of events that ultimately frees them. What makes this even more complex is how these minigames connect to the final confrontation in the safe room, where the spirits corner the murderer, leading to his transformation into Springtrap. The dismantling of the animatronics is a key step in this process, and Shadow Freddy's involvement suggests that he is deeply tied to the mechanics of how the past repeats and resolves itself. He is not simply present. He is actively shaping the sequence of events that led to one of the most important turning points in the story. Shadow Bonnie's role in these minigames is less direct, but arguably even more significant when considering the hidden good ending. In certain secret minigames that can only be accessed through specific actions, often involving glitches, hidden inputs, or unusual interactions, Shadow Bonnie appears as a playable or guiding presence. These sequences are surreal, disconnected from the physical layout of any restaurant, and filled with symbolic imagery like balloons, cakes, and children. The goal in these minigames is to complete tasks that seem simple on the surface, but carry deeper meaning, such as giving cake to a child or assembling pieces of a fragmented environment. These actions culminate in the Happiest Day minigame, where a group of children, represented in a simplified, almost dreamlike form, are finally given a moment of peace. A birthday party is recreated, and one child, often interpreted as the final spirit who has not yet been freed, is given cake, triggering a scene where the spirits seem to move on. Shadow Bonnie's connection to these sequences suggests that he is acting as a kind of bridge or mediator, allowing access to these hidden layers of reality where healing can occur. In contrast to Shadow Freddy, who leads animatronics into destruction, Shadow Bonnie appears to guide the player toward restoration. This creates a striking duality between the two shadow figures. One leads into darkness and collapse, while the other leads into resolution and release. Both are necessary for the full story to unfold. Without the dismantling of the animatronics, the confrontation with the murderer would not happen, and without the hidden minigames, the spirits would remain trapped. The use of these shadow entities in the minigames also reinforces the idea that the events of the series are not purely physical. The minigames exist in a space that feels like memory, dream, or even a kind of spiritual network, where actions can influence outcomes beyond the normal flow of time. Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie operate naturally within this space, further supporting the interpretation that they are not bound to the same rules as other characters. They are part of the underlying system that governs how trauma persists and how it can eventually be resolved. Ultimately, the shadow animatronics embody the unresolved aspects of the story. While many characters in Five Nights at Freddy's have clearer motivations or origins, Shadow Freddy and Shadow Bonnie remain deliberately ambiguous. They are tied to the same tragedies that define the series, but they do not fit neatly into the framework of possession or revenge. Instead, they represent something more abstract and unsettling, the lingering presence of pain, memory, and the consequences of actions that cannot be undone.